First of all, let's start off with, where you grew up and what kind of stuff you're into as a kid and how you got into bikes. First of all, please, Dave.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in rural Massachusetts, which is in the northeast of the United States, kind of a where that's the state that Boston is in.
Hmm.
So we were like maybe 40 miles, 50 miles west of Boston,
Okay.
literally in the middle of nowhere, 1,500 feet elevation up, big hilly kind of place, and only like 2 or 3 thousand people in the town when I grew up, so really small town.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I mean, like every other kid in I was born in 1975, so like every other kid in the 80s, got a BMX bike. It's like everyone's dream to get a bike. When I was like five, I got my first like 20-inch bike and started riding that thing, and way too big for me, but it's so funny, man, looking back. Like my parents found some home video recently, and it was like, we were at camping somewhere, and it was like some dirt pile, and it was just jumping it. And it's the funniest things, like ripping up on it and like did a big skid like up to the camera. It's like one of those coaster brake freaking ones. You just jack on the brake and rip around.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. So I don't know. I guess I don't know. That was kind of the, I guess, start of loving bikes. And I got I was like one of those kids that played like every single sport. I played everything. I was a big, I was a everybody, because of the kind of the miracle on ice thing that happened like in the '80 Olympics. Like I think the entire US was like super focused on hockey at that point, and especially in the Northeast, because Lake Placid is in New York, not super far from where we are or
Yeah.
where we grew up. And so like hockey was huge. So I was on skates when I was like 3 years old and playing
Oh,
hockey when I was four. Um, so that was like a huge part of my life through high school. And I mean, I played like two league teams plus a really high end high school, like a D1 high school program.
wow.
Um,
Brilliant.
and That took a huge amount of time, but it also like forces you to get fit pretty quick, and like teach you fitness. Like you can't play if you're not like, if you're not like sprinting every day.
Sure. Yeah.
So, on the athletic side of stuff, that was a big part of my life, team sports and all that. And then I was also really into mechanical stuff, RC cars. I was a big part of my life growing up as a kid. Um, I was huge into that, and that was something I did like for myself, with my own money. I got a job when I was like 8 years old to pay for basically RC cars, paper route.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I've been working since I was eight. It's incredible.
Oh, my-
It's too much work.
yeah. It's retired.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, that was really that, growing up was wild. Like it was, nonstop. There was very little time for TV, very little time for, not a lot of video game time. It was just wrenching on stuff or, playing sports, one of the two, or out on the bike ripping around the neighborhood, or who know, everywhere.
And what where did you get your interest from, mechanics and that kind of stuff? Was that something that you got from your parents or just something you were interested in?
I mean, I'm sure it's like, ingrained in my DNA somehow. I mean, I definitely I have uncles and had uncles and stuff that were mechanics and things like that. My grandfather's was pretty handy on my mother's side. My father is a pipe fitter, or was a pipe fitter, and a quite technical one at that. Like he was like designing and building and on site and stuff like that, like kind of build to suit stuff like power plants and crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So, stuff was always kind of around, but I think I mean, when I was four, when I was four, I took the head off of my father's lawnmower when he was at work.
No way.
So I wanted to see what was inside the engine. Like just found some sockets, I guess, and just ripped the thing apart. And
Brilliant.
he was pissed when he got home. I mean, believe me, I still remember that.
Yeah.
It must have been extreme because I still remember it. Uh,
That's
so
great.
my
Oh,
grandfather gave me an old Tecumseh engine, and I would just tear that thing apart. And then we wanted to build go-karts, and that's how we got into motocross bikes and all that stuff. It's just kind of interested in how stuff worked. So
brilliant. Yeah.
yeah.
And did you, like in your neighborhood, was there a lot of kids that rode bikes and dirt bikes and stuff, or
Oh
was
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah, we were out in the woods, dude. So I mean, like my brother and I couldn't afford our own motocross bike until we were like literally we were in high school. Like we saved our money together and bought a bike together.
yeah,
but like everybody had bikes. Like this is awesome, actually. When we were in eighth grade, my buddies and I, we realized that you could buy like used mopeds for like $8, $10. So we would look in the want ads and get like any mopeds you possibly could.
Uh-huh.
And we had this pit. Now that's a big development. Back then it was a pit, and we had this huge dirt pile, and we would just jump the freaking mopeds as
Brilliant.
far as you possibly could. And the craziest thing, at the end of one summer, there was like a pile. I'm talking like 20 mopeds in a pile of just broken mopeds. Like the forks are broken off, the frames are bent, like wheels
Brilliant.
are.
Brilliant.
uh, Crazy
That
stuff, man. Stories you can't make shit like that up, man. I look back and I'm like, man, life is crazy. Like,
yeah, it was kind of more, I guess, a bit seemed more simple, didn't it? But I don't know if that's
yeah,
just because we were younger, and I guess um, those early days of doing that though, that's obviously gave you the foundations to where you ended up in the mountain bike world. All that
sure.
you did as a youngster, and then so where did you get you when did you get your first mountain bike then?
Well, look, so I wanted to. I'll back this up to say, like, I wanted to work in Formula One really bad as a kid.
Okay.
That was my path that I went to college. Like, I went to college basically to work in Formula One, and my whole schooling I personally tailored towards that. So
Okay.
started really working on composites early. Like I got a co-op job that was very specifically in vehicle composites manufacturing. I did a huge amount of suspension work for vehicles, four-wheel vehicles. At that point in time, got a great tutor. Guy was awesome and really opened my eyes to what was so. Um, and this is getting to the how I got into bikes part. But
And
I
so was that after you'd finished high school? Was that when you went into
When I
college?
was in high school, I knew what I wanted to do when I was like 7 years old. Like literally, when I was in second grade, I told my teacher like what I wanted to be, and I remember like her saying like that's not really a thing, and
No.
like and I told her I wanted to be a design engineer, which like is kind of crazy because it's really what I ended up, at least part of what I ended up doing. You can't just do that and survive, but like I've definitely done a lot of industrial design, a huge amount of that stuff, and a lot of engineering, like so. But I wanted to work in F1. I wanted to work in the racing industry, and
Sorry,
I met
what
my
why
now wife.
F1? Because obviously in America you have your own, race series and stuff. Where did you get your interest in F1 from?
It's a great question. I don't really know. I mean, it wasn't super televised. I think it probably was just from like old model cars and stuff that look, the F1 cars just looked so cool. And like we watched Indy every year. Well, I watched the Indy series. I mean, dude, I watched every form of motor racing on TV. I'm
Okay.
talking like sprint cars all the way through. I watched everything. Like, we
Yeah.
used to go to like, go to the local oval track and watch them live and stuff. And yeah, F1 was just super, probably because it was the fastest, most technically advanced. And like, keep in mind, growing up, like when I was a kid, like Williams was building the active suspension cars and stuff like that. And to me, that was just like, wow, like mind blowing. Like basically these guys made this, in my mind, was like this robot car, that could like read the freaking ground and, you
Yeah.
know, go as fast as possible, not understanding any of the mechanics behind it or whatever, like, you know, 10, 11, whatever.
So,
So, I don't know. It was just super alluring and interesting. And I just wanted to, I've always been very interested in complex problems,
mhm.
um, and trying to understand them. And like, it was kind of definitely just a lifelong learner. So, yeah, it was just a huge complex problem that seemed like absurd to me in my mind and wanted to understand it as best as possible. And yeah, I think I just kind of kept going down that path. And who knows, probably also got it in my mind. I was just like kind of super headstrong about it, probably, and kind of like, I'm just gonna do this. Like I'm gonna make this happen, like somehow.
That's great.
I don't know. So yeah, whatever. But I met my now wife. We've been together since 1997.
Wow.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, it's kind of hard to be together for like whatever 20 something years and have a 7-year-old. It's almost physically impossible, but we did
Yeah.
it.
Brilliant.
But anyways, I decided I had done my due diligence and talked to a bunch of people that had worked in Formula One and worked in motorsports in Europe. And I had an interview through a guy named Nick Burns, who had connected me with McLaren. I basically was ready to go and like at least get in the door and see if I could get job doing something. And the last minute, I kind of decided, you know what, this isn't for me. So I got a job working for, I had some friends that were my classmates who had worked in the Department of Defense at a company called Foster Miller and got me a job there. And while I was fucking around trying to learn like everything about composites and suspension and stuff, they were all off mountain biking because
Right.
their first co-op job, they all bought mountain bikes with their first, they all, it was the first time they ever had money too. And so they all went and bought mountain bikes and they were like ripping around out,
Yeah.
riding bikes. And so they were like, you need to get a bike. Like, come on, let's go. So I got a bike and started. I bought a Santa Cruz. It was the first gen super light. I rode everything I could get my hands on back then and decided on that bike.
Uh-huh.
And then I like promptly broke that thing. Like, I mean, like a month and a half later, because I
Yeah.
was jumping it off of stupid, huge stuff. I
Yeah.
built it up as a slalom bike out of the gate with disc brakes and stuff. And yeah, anyways, that was the first one. My buddies dragged me into it, and like I'll never forget, Nigel, the first day we went to this place, Linwoods, which was like straight up and down, a lot of drops, a lot of flat drops and stuff. And I just remember like swearing at those guys, being like, "What the hell did you get me? Dude, this is ridiculous. Like, what are we doing? Like, I'm used to just hammering the throttle and just ripping up something. I'm like, I gotta pedal up this? Like, you kidding me? This
Yeah.
sucks." Like,
No way. And yeah, because
uh,
I guess round that area, you've got some big hills and stuff, so you've got to
oh yeah.
get up there. Yeah.
And crazy steep punchy stuff, like almost no seated climbing, like you're saddled down everywhere, just hammering, just like scratching and clawing trying to get up.